When we sit down, closing our eyes to the busy world, we often carry with us a heavy bag of expectations, hoping for an immediate escape from the chaos, a sudden silence that will wash over our weary minds like a cool wave on a scorching summer afternoon. It is natural to desire peace, to want a sanctuary where the echoes of daily worries finally fade into the background, but this very desire can sometimes become the first hurdle on our journey toward true clarity. Meditation is not a battle to be won against our thoughts, nor is it a performance where we must achieve a perfect state of emptiness to be considered successful. Rather, it is a kind of gentle friendship we cultivate with ourselves. Imagine, friends, a traveler in ancient times who heard of a magnificent mountain peak that offered a view of the entire world, a place where the air was pure and the heart could finally rest. This traveler, fueled by stories of enlightenment, began the climb with great intensity, focusing only on the summit, counting every step with an anxious heart, and resenting every pebble that caused a stumble. In his haste to reach the top, he failed to notice the fragrance of the wildflowers lining the path, the soft murmur of the hidden brooks, or the way the golden sunlight filtered through the leaves of the ancient trees. He arrived at the peak exhausted, his legs trembling, his mind still racing with the effort of the climb, and realized that while he had reached the high ground, he had missed the essence of the mountain itself. Many of us approach our meditation cushion in this exact same way, treating it as a task to be completed, a goal to be checked off a list, rather than an unfolding process of discovery. One of the most common ripples in the pond of our practice is the belief that we must stop all thinking, that a successful session is one where the mind is as blank as a sheet of white paper. When thoughts inevitably arise, as they are designed to do, we often feel a sense of frustration, believing we have failed or that we are simply not built for such a practice. However, the mind produces thoughts just as the eyes see light and the ears hear sound, and to demand that it cease its natural function is like asking the wind to stop blowing or the ocean to stop its rhythmic tides. In the early days of the Sangha, there was a young seeker named Ananda, who possessed a heart full of devotion but a mind that was incredibly active, constantly swirling with questions and reflections on the teachings he heard. He often worried that his busy intellect was a barrier to the deep stillness he saw in the eyes of the great teacher, wondering if he would ever find that elusive quietude. He learned, over time, that the goal was not to build a dam to stop the flow of the river, but to sit comfortably on the bank and watch the water pass by without jumping in to follow every leaf that floated on the surface. When we sit, we are invited to become that observer on the riverbank, noticing the thoughts of work, the memories of yesterday, the plans for tomorrow, and even the subtle judgments about our own performance. If a thought appears, we do not need to push it away with force, nor do we need to invite it to stay for tea and a long conversation. We simply acknowledge its presence with a soft smile and return our attention to the breath. This gentle returning is the actual practice, the strengthening of the muscle of awareness, and every time we realize we have wandered off and come back, we have succeeded. There is no such thing as a bad meditation, because every moment of awareness is a victory over the habitual fog of distraction that usually guides our lives. If you spend 30 minutes returning to your breath 1,000 times, you have practiced 1,000 acts of mindfulness, which is far more valuable than sitting in a forced, rigid trance for an hour. Sometimes, everyone feels the physical strain of sitting, believing that they must maintain a statue-like posture, frozen in a perfect lotus position even if their knees are screaming in protest and their back feels like it is being pulled by invisible wires. While a stable posture helps the energy flow and keeps the mind alert, turning meditation into a test of physical endurance can often create more tension than it releases. The body and mind are deeply interconnected, like the strings of a lute that must be tuned just right, not too tight or they will snap, and not too loose or they will produce no music at all. There is an old story of a musician who sought the path of peace and asked how he should balance his effort, to which the wise response was a reminder of his own instrument. If you strain your body to the point of pain, your mind will naturally focus on that pain, creating a cycle of aversion and resistance that is the opposite of the openness we are trying to foster. It is perfectly fine to adjust your position, to use a chair, or to place a cushion behind your back, as long as the intention remains focused on being present and awake. We often fall into the trap of comparing our internal experience with the idealized images we see, the serene figures in paintings or the calm expressions of others in a group setting. We might look at someone else and think they are surely experiencing profound bliss while we are struggling with a numb leg and a thought about what to cook for dinner. This comparison is a subtle form of ego that pulls us out of our own unique journey, creating a sense of inadequacy that has no place in a heart seeking genuine rest. Your journey is your own, and the obstacles you face are the very materials you use to build your understanding, for it is through working with our restlessness that we learn the true meaning of patience. Even the most seasoned practitioners have days when the mind is like a wild forest full of chattering monkeys, swinging from branch to branch without a moment of pause. On such days, the practice is simply to be the space that holds the monkeys, to be the sky that allows the storm clouds to pass through without being stained by them. Another misconception that often shadows our path is the idea that meditation is a special state that only happens when our eyes are closed and our legs are crossed, a magical realm separate from the mundane tasks of living. We might spend 20 minutes in a lovely state of calm, only to lose it the moment someone cuts us off in traffic or a colleague makes an annoying comment. This separation creates a fragmented life where we are spiritual for a few minutes a day and reactive for the remaining hours, missing the opportunity to infuse every breath with the quality of awareness. True sitting is a rehearsal for living, a way to gather the inner strength and clarity that we then carry out into the world, like a lamp that stays lit even when we move from one room to another. Every step we take, every word we speak, and every dish we wash can be an extension of that same quiet presence we cultivate on the cushion. When the Buddha was teaching in the bamboo grove, he often emphasized that mindfulness should be practiced whether one is standing, walking, sitting, or lying down, ensuring that the flame of awareness is never extinguished. He spoke of a person who carries a bowl of oil filled to the very brim through a crowded, noisy marketplace, where dancers and musicians are performing and the air is thick with distractions. This person must maintain a steady focus on the bowl, for if even a single drop spills, there will be consequences, yet they must also navigate the crowd and move toward their destination. Our life is that marketplace, and the oil is our precious awareness, which we must learn to hold steady amidst the beautiful and the chaotic experiences that surround us. If we only practice in a soundproof room with incense burning, we will find ourselves vulnerable when the inevitable noise of life returns. We must also be careful of the hidden desire to attain special powers, visions, or exotic experiences that some books or teachers might emphasize as signs of progress. It is quite common for the mind to create its own entertainment when we deprive it of external stimulation, leading to vivid colors, strange sensations, or even a sense of floating. While these can be interesting, they are ultimately just more scenery on the side of the road, and getting attached to them is like stopping your car to stare at a billboard when you are trying to reach home. The most profound miracle is not flying through the air or seeing the past, but the ability to be fully present with a single breath, to feel the simple texture of existence without needing it to be anything more than it is. The simplicity of the practice is often its greatest challenge, as our ego loves complexity and wants to feel that it is doing something extraordinary and grand. There is a beautiful story of a monk who lived in a remote cave and practiced with such intensity that he eventually believed he had conquered all his anger and pride, feeling a deep sense of superiority over those who lived in the bustling cities. One day, he decided to travel down to the village to test his newfound serenity, walking with a dignified air and a peaceful smile that seemed carved from marble. As he moved through the narrow streets, a clumsy laborer accidentally bumped into him, spilling a bucket of muddy water all over the monk's pristine robes. In an instant, the monk's face turned red, his eyes flashed with fury, and he began to shout at the poor man, his years of cave meditation vanishing like smoke in a gale. He realized in that painful moment that his peace was a fragile thing, built on the absence of challenge rather than a true transformation of the heart. Meditation that does not translate into kindness and resilience in the face of life's little accidents is like a house built on sand, beautiful to look at but unable to withstand the rising tide. When we approach our practice with a spirit of gentleness, we begin to see that even our mistakes are teachers, pointing us toward the areas where we are still holding on too tightly. If we find ourselves nodding off to sleep, we can simply notice the quality of dullness without judging it, perhaps straightening our back or opening our eyes slightly to let in a bit of light. If we feel a surge of restlessness, we can observe the physical sensations of that energy, the buzzing in the chest or the twitching in the fingers, becoming curious about how it feels rather than trying to suppress it. This curiosity is a powerful tool, turning every experience into an opportunity for learning rather than a reason for self-criticism. We are not trying to create a new, better version of ourselves, but rather to peel away the layers of habit and reaction that hide the luminous nature that has been there all along. The journey of the heart is often a quiet one, marked not by loud revelations but by a steady softening of the edges, a gradual opening to the reality of the present moment with all its imperfections. We learn to sit with our sadness just as we sit with our joy, recognizing that both are fleeting guests in the vast house of our awareness. This equanimity is the true fruit of the practice, a stability that allows us to remain centered when the world turns upside down, a peace that does not depend on everything going our way. It is a long game, a path of 1,000 miles that begins and ends with the very breath you are taking right now, a simple act that connects you to every living being who has ever sought the light. As we continue to share this space, let us remember that the most important thing is simply to show up, to sit down with a heart full of compassion for ourselves, and to trust that the process will unfold in its own perfect time. Trusting the natural rhythm of our unfolding awareness allows us to move deeper into the subtle layers of the mind, where we often encounter the phantom of spiritual ambition, a quiet yet persistent voice that tells us we must be gaining something tangible from every moment of silence. This ambition is a clever disguise worn by the ego, making us feel that if we do not see bright lights or feel a profound sense of ecstasy, then our time on the cushion is being wasted. We live in a world that prizes productivity and results, so it is only natural that we bring this same drive to our spiritual path, looking for a return on our investment of time and effort. However, meditation is truly the art of non-doing, a rare space in our lives where we are not trying to get anywhere else, but are simply learning to be exactly where we are. If we approach the breath with the same intensity we use to finish a work project, we only add more layers of stress to a mind that is already tired from the constant pressure to achieve. There is a story of a young man who traveled to a monastery deep in the mountains, carrying a heavy heart and a burning desire to find the secret of permanent happiness. He approached an elderly teacher and asked how long it would take him to reach enlightenment if he meditated for 10 hours every single day with total focus. The teacher looked at him with a kind and slightly amused gaze and replied that it would likely take 20 years, which frustrated the young man, who then asked what if he worked twice as hard and never slept. The teacher smiled gently and said that in that case, it would probably take 40 years, because the more force one applies to the delicate opening of the heart, the more it tends to retreat like a sensitive flower in a harsh wind. We cannot command the mind to be still any more than we can command a seedling to grow into a tree overnight by pulling on its leaves. We can only provide the right conditions of patience, kindness, and steady presence. Another shadow that frequently falls across our path is the tendency to turn our meditation into a form of intellectual analysis, where we spend our time thinking about the concepts of peace or the theory of mindfulness rather than actually experiencing the breath. It is easy to get caught up in the beauty of the teachings, playing with the ideas like shining jewels in our hands, but we must remember that reading a map is not the same as walking the territory. You might spend your whole session contemplating the nature of impermanence, yet if you are not feeling the actual rising and falling of your chest, you are still lost in the world of concepts. The teachings are like a finger pointing at the moon, meant to guide our gaze toward the reality of our own experience, but if we only stare at the finger and admire its shape, we miss the celestial glow of the moon itself. Sometimes, we find ourselves becoming overly attached to the pleasant states that occasionally arise, those moments of deep tranquility when the body feels light and the mind is as clear as a mountain lake. When these states inevitably change and the old restlessness returns, we often feel a sense of loss or even anger, trying desperately to recreate what was just there a moment ago. This clinging is what creates suffering, as we are trying to freeze a flowing river, forgetting that the nature of all experiences is to arise, stay for a while, and then pass away. The peace we seek is not a specific feeling that we must capture and hold on to, but the capacity to be at peace with whatever feeling is present, whether it is comfort or discomfort, clarity or confusion. True freedom is found not in the absence of noise, but in a heart that does not move when the noise begins. In the time of the Buddha, there was a man who was very wealthy but deeply troubled by a constant sense of anxiety that followed him like a shadow, no matter how many luxuries he surrounded himself with. He came to the forest and sat near the community of practitioners, noticing how they seemed to carry an invisible light within them even though they owned nothing but their robes and bowls. He tried to mimic their stillness, sitting perfectly upright and closing his eyes, but his mind was filled with the accounts of his businesses and the fear of losing his status. He realized that his problem was not the thoughts themselves, but his identification with them, the belief that he was the owner of these worries rather than just the space where they appeared. He began to see that his mind was like a vast theater, and while the play on stage might be a tragedy or a comedy, the theater itself remains unchanged by the drama. When we feel overwhelmed by the intensity of our emotions during practice, we might be tempted to use meditation as a way to suppress or bypass our pain, hoping to find a spiritual shortcut that skips over the messy parts of being human. This is often called spiritual bypassing, where we use grand concepts of oneness or emptiness to avoid looking at our very real wounds and vulnerabilities. However, the path of the heart requires us to be brave enough to meet our shadows with the same tenderness we offer to our joys, recognizing that our difficulties are the very gateway to our transformation. If we feel a knot of grief or a spark of anger, we do not need to analyze why it is there or try to make it go away. We simply bring our breath to the sensation, letting it be held in a field of compassionate awareness. Many of us also struggle with the habit of judging our progress, constantly checking to see if we are getting better at meditating or if we are still the same person we were last month. This self-evaluation is a subtle poison that keeps us locked in a cycle of pride and disappointment, preventing us from simply resting in the present moment as it is. Progress in the spiritual life is rarely a straight line moving upward. It is more like the tides of the sea, sometimes coming in and sometimes going out, yet always part of the same vast and deep ocean. You might feel like you have taken 10 steps backward on a day when your mind is particularly loud, but the very act of noticing that loudness is a sign of deepening awareness. The goal is not to become a perfect meditator, but to become a more human, more compassionate, and more awake version of ourselves in every aspect of our lives. The environment we create around our practice can also be a source of subtle mistakes, such as believing that we can only find peace in a perfectly silent room with the right temperature and the perfect cushion. While these things are helpful when we are starting out, if we become dependent on them, our peace will always be fragile and easily shattered by the first sound of a neighbor's lawnmower or a barking dog. We should learn to include the sounds of the world in our meditation, treating them as part of the tapestry of the present moment rather than as interruptions. A bird's song, the hum of a refrigerator, or even the distant siren of an ambulance are all just vibrations in the air, neither good nor bad until our mind labels them as such. When we stop fighting the world stops being our enemy, and we find that we can be still even in the heart of a storm. There was a wise practitioner who lived in a busy market town and would often sit by the main gate where the carts rattled and the merchants shouted their prices from dawn until dusk. People asked him why he did not go to the quiet hills to find his silence, and he replied that if he could not find peace in the middle of the market, then his peace was not real, it was just a temporary absence of noise. He taught that the true monastery is within the heart, a place of sanctuary that we carry with us wherever we go, whether we are in a crowded temple or a busy office. This inner stillness is not something we create, it is something we discover when we stop making so much effort to build a wall between ourselves and the world around us. We often underestimate the power of consistency, thinking that a long retreat once a year is more important than 5 minutes of quiet presence every morning. Our habits are like deep grooves in a stone, carved over many years of reactive thinking and distracted living, and it takes a steady, gentle dripping of water to smooth those edges and create a new path. It is better to sit for a short time with a sincere and open heart than to sit for hours with a mind that is full of resentment and longing for the session to end. This consistency builds a foundation of trust within ourselves, a knowing that we will always make time to return home to the breath, no matter how busy the day becomes. This simple commitment is an act of profound self-love, a way of saying that our inner well-being is worth our time and attention. As we become more familiar with the landscape of our inner world, we start to see that the obstacles we once feared are actually the very things that help us grow. The restlessness, the boredom, the doubt, and the wandering mind are all just different expressions of the human condition, and they offer us endless opportunities to practice patience and non-judgment. When we stop trying to fix ourselves and instead start to listen to ourselves with a heart of compassion, the struggle begins to dissolve on its own. We realize that the peace we have been searching for so far away has been right here all along, hidden beneath the noise of our own expectations and the dust of our constant striving. It is like looking for your glasses when they are already perched on top of your head, a realization that brings a soft laugh and a deep sense of relief. This relief often leads us to a deeper understanding of the breath itself, yet here lies another subtle trap where we might mistakenly try to control the air entering and leaving our bodies, as if we were a blacksmith working a pair of bellows with a heavy hand. We sometimes believe that for a breath to be spiritual or effective, it must be exceptionally long, or deep, or quiet, and so we begin to manipulate the natural rhythm that the body has known since the very moment of our birth. This subtle control creates a hidden tension in the chest and shoulders, a physical manifestation of our desire to dominate the present moment rather than simply witnessing it. True meditation is not about breathing in a certain way, but about being aware of how the breath is naturally occurring, allowing the body to take exactly what it needs without interference from the ego. In a quiet village long ago, there was a weaver who was famous for creating the most delicate silks, and when people asked him the secret of his craft, he told them that he simply followed the thread with his eyes while his hands moved without thought. He said that if he tried to force the thread to go where it did not want to go, it would surely snap, or the pattern would become distorted with the energy of his own anxiety. He treated the loom as an extension of his own breathing, letting the shuttle fly back and forth in a natural dance that required no effort, only a steady and loving attention. When we sit, we are like that weaver, watching the thread of the breath move through the loom of the body, noticing when it is short, when it is long, when it is smooth, or when it is slightly jagged, without needing to change a single thing about it. This quality of non-interference extends to the way we handle the feelings of boredom or emptiness that often arise when the initial excitement of starting a spiritual practice begins to wear thin. We live in an age of constant stimulation, where our minds are fed a continuous diet of images, sounds, and information, so when we finally sit in silence, the lack of input can feel like a desert, dry and devoid of life. Many people abandon their practice at this stage, believing that nothing is happening or that they are doing it wrong because they no longer feel the spark of inspiration. However, this very boredom is a sign that the mind is beginning to detoxify from its addiction to distraction, a necessary clearing of the ground before a more stable and quiet joy can begin to take root. There is an old story of a man who spent his life digging for gold in a rugged canyon, moving massive rocks and sifting through piles of dirt with a desperate energy, always looking for the one big nugget that would change his life forever. He grew weary and frustrated because he found nothing but dust and common stones, and he was ready to give up and return to his village in defeat. One day, a wise traveler passed by and saw the man's exhaustion, suggesting that instead of digging deeper into the earth, he should sit quietly by the stream and watch the way the water washed over the pebbles at his feet. The man did as he was told, and as his mind slowed down and his eyes became clear, he began to see small, shimmering flakes of gold that had been there all along, hidden in plain sight because he had been too busy looking for something grand and heavy. We often miss the small, shimmering moments of clarity in our meditation because we are waiting for a lightning bolt of wisdom to strike us, forgetting that the most profound shifts often happen in the quietest corners of our awareness. If we can learn to stay with the boredom, to look into the heart of the emptiness with a sense of wonder, we find that it is not a void, but a fertile space teeming with subtle life. This is where we begin to notice the tiny changes in the temperature of the air on our skin, the distant song of a bird that we usually ignore, or the way a single thought rises like a bubble and disappears without leaving a trace. These are the true treasures of the path, the small realizations that slowly build a foundation of unshakable peace within our hearts. A common mistake that many of us make is turning our meditation into an isolated island, a place where we go to hide from the difficulties of our relationships or the stresses of our daily responsibilities. While it is important to have a dedicated time for silence, if we use that silence as a way to shut out the world, we are creating a wall rather than a bridge. Our practice should make us more sensitive to the needs of others, more capable of listening with an open heart, and more willing to respond to the suffering we see around us with kindness and grace. If you find that your sitting makes you more irritable when you are interrupted, or more judgmental of those who do not share your interest in mindfulness, it is a sign that the ego has hijacked the practice to make itself feel superior and separate. In the mountains of the East, a student once complained to his teacher that the noise from the nearby village was making it impossible for him to focus on his mantras, begging for permission to move to a higher, more secluded peak. The teacher agreed but gave the student a small bell, telling him that every time he felt frustrated by a sound, he should ring the bell and offer a wish of happiness to the person who made the noise. The student soon found that the higher he went, the more the wind howled and the more the birds chirped, providing endless opportunities to ring his bell and send out thoughts of goodwill. Eventually, he realized that the noise was not the problem, but his own resistance to it, and he returned to the village, finding that the clamor of the market was no different from the music of the forest when his heart was full of compassion. We also tend to struggle with the idea of time, often checking the clock or wondering how much longer we have to sit before we can get back to our real life. This preoccupation with the future prevents us from being fully present in the only moment that actually exists, which is the one we are in right now. The quality of our attention is much more important than the quantity of minutes we spend on the cushion, and a single minute of total presence is worth more than an hour of wandering in the past or the future. When we let go of the need to reach the end of the session, we find that time itself begins to feel different, stretching and softening until there is no sense of rushing, only a deep and spacious sense of being. Every time we catch ourselves leaning toward the future or clinging to the past, we have a precious chance to practice the art of returning, a movement of the soul that is as gentle as a feather landing on water. We do not need to scold ourselves for being human, for having a mind that likes to travel. We only need to recognize the movement and choose to come back to the simplicity of this breath and this body. This returning is the essence of the spiritual life, a continuous process of remembering who we are beneath the layers of our stories and our roles. It is a path that requires no special equipment, no secret knowledge, and no perfect conditions, only a heart that is willing to be honest and a mind that is brave enough to be still. As we sit together in this shared silence, let us remember that we are not trying to reach a destination, but are learning to love the journey itself, with all its twists and turns. The mistakes we make are not signs of failure, but are the very footprints that show us the way home, guiding us deeper into the mystery of our own existence. There is a great beauty in the imperfection of our practice, for it is through the cracks in our carefully built walls that the light of understanding finally begins to shine. We are all learners, all travelers on this ancient road, and each step we take in awareness is a gift not only to ourselves but to the entire world that so desperately needs more peace and more kindness. The light that begins to shine through those cracks in our resistance often reveals a hidden layer of spiritual pride, a very subtle feeling that because we sit in silence, we are somehow more evolved or more aware than those who spend their days in the rush of the world. This is a common detour on the path, where the ego takes the peaceful experiences we have found and turns them into a badge of honor, a secret identity that separates us from the people we love. If we find ourselves looking at others with a sense of pity or judgment because they do not meditate, we have accidentally turned our practice into a wall rather than a window, losing the very essence of compassion that the teachings are meant to cultivate. True awareness should make us feel more connected to the clerk at the grocery store, the noisy neighbor, and the stranger on the street, for we begin to see that everyone is carrying their own invisible burden and seeking their own way toward a bit of comfort. There was once a monk who had spent many years in solitary retreat, mastering the art of keeping his mind as still as a frozen lake, and he felt a great sense of accomplishment in his ability to remain undisturbed by the elements. He decided to return to the city to share his wisdom, walking with a very straight back and a face that showed no emotion, believing he was now beyond the reach of human frailty. However, as he sat in a crowded park, he noticed a group of children playing nearby, their laughter and shouting echoing through the trees, and he felt a sudden spark of irritation at the disruption of his quietude. He realized that his peace was like a fragile piece of glass that only stayed intact when the room was empty, and the moment life touched it, the glass began to shatter. The children were not the obstacle to his peace, his own idea of what peace should look like was the obstacle, and he saw that a heart that cannot hold the joy of a child is not yet truly free. This realization brings us to the common mistake of trying to create a specific emotional state during meditation, such as forced bliss or a simulated kindness that does not feel entirely honest. We might think that if we are not feeling overwhelmed with love for all beings, then we are doing something wrong, and so we try to pump up our emotions like a tire, hoping to feel the way we think a spiritual person should feel. This effort only creates a sense of exhaustion and a feeling of being a bit of a fraud, as we are ignoring the very real feelings of fatigue, or sadness, or even anger that might be present in that moment. It is much more transformative to sit with a heart that feels like a cold stone and simply notice that coldness with honesty, for the act of being truthful with ourselves is the most direct path to a genuine opening. When we stop trying to manufacture a holy feeling, we discover that there is a natural warmth that arises on its own, a quiet friendliness toward our own existence that does not require any effort to maintain. This warmth is not a dramatic emotion, but a steady presence, like the heat from a wood stove that has been burning all night, providing a quiet comfort to the entire house. It allows us to meet our wandering thoughts not as enemies to be conquered, but as old friends who are simply telling the same stories they have told 1,000 times before. We can listen to the stories without being swept away by them, noticing the familiar patterns of our own minds with a sense of gentle humor, which is often the best medicine for a heavy heart. We also tend to struggle with the concept of energy, sometimes believing that we must feel a great surge of power or a tingling sensation to know that our practice is working. This focus on the physical sensations of energy can lead us to become experience junkies, always looking for the next high or the next strange feeling, which only keeps us trapped in the cycle of seeking and grasping. The most profound energy is often the most quiet, a subtle shift in the way we hold our bodies and the way we perceive the space around us, a sense of being firmly rooted in the earth while our spirit remains as light as the air. If we spend our time waiting for fireworks, we miss the quiet beauty of the moonlight, which is always there, steady and calm, illuminating the path without making any noise at all. There is a story of a young student who went to his teacher and complained that after months of sitting, he felt absolutely nothing, no visions, no light, no special insights, just the sound of his own breathing and the occasional ache in his back. The teacher looked at him with great kindness and said that this was the most wonderful news he had heard all day, for it meant the student was finally stopping the search for something else and was beginning to settle into the reality of things as they are. To feel nothing is often a sign that the ego's constant need for entertainment is finally starting to starve, allowing the true nature of the mind to reveal itself in its simple, unadorned glory. It is in this ordinary space that the most extraordinary transformations occur, like a seed that grows in the dark, silent earth long before the first green shoot ever breaks the surface. We must also be mindful of the mistake of taking ourselves too seriously, turning our spiritual journey into a grim and heavy labor that leaves no room for playfulness or lightheartedness. If our practice makes us rigid, or if we find that we have lost our ability to laugh at our own mistakes, we have wandered away from the middle way and into the territory of austerity. The Buddha often spoke of the importance of joy as a factor of awakening, a bright and buoyant energy that lifts the mind and makes it flexible and resilient. A sense of humor is a sign of perspective, a realization that while our struggles are real, they are also part of a much larger and more mysterious dance that we do not fully understand. When we can laugh at the way our mind tries to plan a vacation while we are supposed to be focusing on the breath, we take the power away from the distraction and return to the present with a smile. This lightness of being is what allows us to stay on the cushion even when the legs are tired and the mind is restless, for we are no longer fighting ourselves, we are simply enjoying the company of our own soul. It is like sitting on a porch with an old friend, where there is no need to fill every silence with words, and no need to be anything other than exactly who you are. This comfort with ourselves is the greatest gift we can offer to the world, for a person who is at peace with their own heart becomes a sanctuary for everyone they meet. Every breath is a fresh start, a chance to let go of the previous moment's failures and the next moment's worries, a simple return to the life that is pulsating within us right now. We do not need to wait for a better time, or a quieter place, or a more enlightened version of ourselves to begin, we only need to have the courage to be here, fully and completely. This presence is the true meaning of the teachings, a way of living that honors the sacredness of the ordinary and the beauty of the present. As we continue to move through this flow of shared awareness, let us hold ourselves with a gentle hand, trusting that every step, even the ones where we stumble, is leading us closer to the heart of the truth. Trusting the gentle flow of this shared journey, we sometimes encounter a hidden obstacle known as the trap of artificial stillness, where we mistakenly believe that to be a good practitioner, we must become like a stone or a piece of wood, showing no reaction to the world around us. We might try to suppress our natural empathy or our spontaneous joy, thinking that a truly spiritual person is always serious, always composed, and always distant from the vibrant colors of human emotion. This cold detachment is not the same as the warm equanimity taught by the wise ones, for true peace does not mean we stop feeling, but rather that we feel more deeply without being drowned by the waves of our experiences. If we close our hearts to the pain of the world to protect our own quietude, we are not finding liberation, we are merely building a more comfortable prison for our ego to reside in. In a village nestled at the foot of a great mountain, there lived a master who was known for his immense kindness and his ability to cry with those who were grieving and laugh with those who were celebrating. A student once asked him how he could remain so peaceful if he allowed himself to be so affected by the lives of others, to which the master replied that his heart was like the vast sky. When a storm passes through the sky does not fight the rain or the thunder, it allows them to happen, and when the sun shines, it allows the warmth to spread, yet the sky itself remains spacious and unchanged by the weather. We do not need to become cold to be still, we only need to expand the boundaries of our heart until there is enough room for everything to exist without crowding our sense of peace. Another common mistake we often make is the tendency to wait for the perfect moment to be mindful, thinking that we need a special atmosphere, a certain kind of music, or a specific set of circumstances to truly connect with ourselves. We tell ourselves that we will be more present when the kids are grown, or when the job is less stressful, or when we finally go on that retreat we have been dreaming about. This keeps our peace perpetually in the future, a flickering mirage that retreats every time we take a step toward it, leaving us empty-handed in the present. The truth is that the only perfect moment for awareness is the one you are breathing in right now, whether you are standing in a long line at the bank, sitting in a noisy waiting room, or dealing with a difficult conversation. There is a story of a young monk who was assigned the task of sweeping the courtyard of the monastery every single morning, a job he found tedious and beneath his intellectual abilities. He would sweep with a hurried, resentful energy, looking at the falling leaves as his enemies and wishing he were inside the hall studying the profound scriptures instead. One day, the head monk saw his frustration and told him that the leaves were not cluttering the courtyard, but were actually the words of the most important scripture ever written, and each stroke of the broom was a chance to read a line of truth. When the young monk changed his perspective, the act of sweeping became a moving prayer, and he found more wisdom in the rustle of the leaves than he ever had in the dusty pages of his books. We also find ourselves falling into the trap of spiritual consumerism, where we collect techniques, gadgets, and teachings like souvenirs from a trip, hoping that the next book, the next app, or the next teacher will finally provide the missing piece of the puzzle. This constant searching for something outside of ourselves is a form of restlessness that prevents us from ever truly settling into the practice we already have. It is like a man who wants to dig a well but moves to a new spot every time he hits a few rocks, never staying in one place long enough to actually reach the water. If we can stay with one simple breath, one simple movement of the heart, and one simple act of kindness, we will find that we already have everything we need to be whole. Many of us struggle with the feeling that our meditation should be a linear progression toward perfection, and when we have a day where we feel particularly scattered or reactive, we judge ourselves harshly. We forget that the mind is part of nature, and just as the moon has its phases and the seasons change from the abundance of summer to the barrenness of winter, our inner world has its own cycles of growth and rest. A day of struggle is not a sign of failure, it is a sign that we are human and that we are engaged in the honest work of being present with whatever arises. The most advanced practice is often simply the ability to forgive ourselves for our wandering minds and to start over with a fresh, curious heart, without carrying the weight of yesterday's disappointments. The Buddha once spoke to a group of friends about a lute player who was struggling to find the right tension for his strings, noticing how the music was either dull or discordant depending on how he tuned the instrument. He reminded them that the path of awareness is exactly the same, requiring a delicate balance between effort and relaxation, between focus and openness. If we try too hard, we create tension that blocks the natural flow of our wisdom, and if we do not try at all, we fall into a state of dullness and drift through our lives like a boat without a rudder. We learn to find that sweet spot in the middle, where we are alert and awake, yet completely at ease with the unfolding of each moment. As we continue to explore the landscape of our inner world, let us be wary of the desire to use our practice as a way to gain power or influence over others, even in subtle ways. Sometimes we might want to show off how long we can sit, or how much we know about the philosophy of the mind, using our spirituality to bolster a sense of a special self that is better than others. This is the ultimate irony, as the practice is meant to help us dissolve the very ego that is now trying to claim it as a trophy. True humility is the natural result of seeing clearly how interconnected we all are, and how each of us is simply doing our best with the tools we have been given. Every time we breathe out, we are practicing the art of letting go, releasing the air that we no longer need and trusting that the next breath will arrive on its own. This simple physical act is a profound metaphor for the way we can live our lives, letting go of our attachments to our opinions, our fears, and our carefully constructed identities. When we stop clinging so tightly to the way we think things should be, we open ourselves up to the way things actually are, which is often far more beautiful and mysterious than anything we could have imagined. This openness is the gateway to a life that is lived with a sense of wonder and a heart that is ready for anything. In the quiet spaces between our thoughts, there is a stillness that has never been disturbed by the noise of our worries or the chaos of our lives, a sanctuary that is always available to us if we only remember to look for it. We do not need to create this stillness, we only need to stop making so much noise ourselves so that we can finally hear it. It is like a radio that is already playing a beautiful melody, but we have been so busy talking that we haven't noticed the music was there all along. As we sit together, let us listen to that silent music, letting it wash over us and remind us of the peace that is our true home. Listening to that silent music often brings us face to face with the subtle mistake of over-identifying with the physical body during meditation, where we might treat the vessel of our spirit as a machine that must be forced into submission. We sometimes become so obsessed with the mechanics of the spine, the angle of the chin, or the placement of the hands that we forget the body is a living, breathing partner in our journey, not a stubborn obstacle to be conquered. When we treat our physical form with a sense of clinical coldness or harsh discipline, we miss the opportunity to listen to the quiet wisdom it carries in every cell. A stiff neck or a restless hand is often just a message from the deep, a sign that we are holding on to a hidden worry or a forgotten tension, and if we meet these sensations with a soft touch rather than a firm command, they often dissolve of their own accord. There was once a gardener who spent his days tending to a royal orchard, and he noticed that the trees which were pruned with a heavy, aggressive hand often grew brittle and bore sour fruit, while those he touched with a gentle respect thrived in the sun. He learned that the wood had its own grain, its own memory of the wind, and its own way of reaching for the light, and he realized that his job was not to dictate the shape of the tree, but to support its natural inclination to grow. Our practice is much like that orchard, where the body is the soil and the awareness is the sun, and if we try to force a certain posture through sheer willpower, we create a brittle kind of peace that snaps under the slightest pressure. When we learn to inhabit our skin with a sense of gratitude, we find that the body becomes a bridge to the present moment rather than a cage that keeps us from it. Another gentle shadow that can cloud our vision is the tendency to turn meditation into a form of self-improvement, a project where we are constantly trying to fix the parts of ourselves that we find inconvenient or unappealing. We might approach the cushion with the hidden hope that if we sit long enough, we will finally stop being impatient, or we will finally become the calm, wise person we imagine in our heads. This focus on fixing implies that who we are right now is somehow broken or insufficient, which creates a subtle layer of aggression toward our own soul. True sitting is not about changing who you are, but about finally meeting who you are with a heart that has no desire to change a single thing. It is the radical act of saying yes to your current reality, including the flaws and the messy bits, for it is only through this unconditional acceptance that a genuine, effortless transformation can occur. In a time when the great teachers walked the dusty roads, there was a traveler who was deeply ashamed of his own quick temper and spent all his energy trying to hide it under a mask of polite smiles and quiet words. He sat in meditation for hours, visualizing himself as a calm river, Yet the moment someone spoke a word that challenged his ego, the fire of his anger would flare up even brighter than before. He felt like a failure until a wise elder told him that he was like a man trying to put out a forest fire by throwing blankets of snow over the flames while still secretly feeding the fire with dry wood. The elder suggested that instead of trying to extinguish the anger, he should simply sit with it, feel the heat in his chest, notice the pulse in his temples, and look at the anger as if it were a lost child crying for attention. By stopping the war against himself, the traveler found that the anger no longer had a reason to fight back, and it slowly settled into a quiet, warm energy that he could use for good. We also frequently encounter the mistake of expecting our meditation to provide us with a shield against the inevitable pains of life, as if a daily practice would somehow grant us immunity from grief, loss, or disappointment. We might feel a sense of betrayal when life becomes difficult, thinking that our commitment to mindfulness should have protected us from the storm, forgetting that the path is not about avoiding the rain but about learning how to walk through it without losing our center. If we use our practice as a way to hide from the world, we are merely building a more refined version of an ivory tower, and we will find that our peace is a hollow thing that cannot survive a real challenge. True strength is found in a heart that can break and still remain open, a spirit that can feel the full weight of a tragedy and still find a reason to offer a smile to a neighbor. This leads us to the subtle habit of turning our insights into new dogmas, where we take a small realization we had during a quiet moment and turn it into a rigid rule for how life should be lived. We might find that a certain way of breathing helped us once, and suddenly we believe that everyone must breathe that way, or we might have felt a sense of clarity from a specific teaching and now we judge anyone who does not follow that exact path. This rigidity is the opposite of the fluid, spacious quality of awareness that the practice is meant to nourish, for truth is not a static object we can put in our pocket, but a living process that changes with every heartbeat. When we hold on to our insights too tightly, they become just more concepts that clutter the mind, preventing us from seeing the fresh, unscripted reality of the moment that is right in front of us. Every morning, the sun rises over the horizon without asking for permission and without following a script, and our awareness can be just as bright and spontaneous if we stop trying to trap it in the cages of our own expectations. We do not need to be perfect to be worthy of this peace, and we do not need to have a mind that is as clear as a diamond to be a true practitioner of the heart. All that is required is the willingness to be here, to feel the breath as it is, and to meet ourselves with a sense of kindness that does not ask for anything in return. This kindness is the secret ingredient that turns a mechanical exercise into a sacred act of living, a way of being that recognizes the divine spark in the ordinary and the extraordinary beauty in the simple. As we breathe together in this space, let us release the need to be anyone other than who we are, and let us drop the heavy bag of our spiritual ambitions at the door. There is nowhere to go, nothing to achieve, and no one to impress, for the silence itself is the teacher and the breath itself is the way home. We are like children sitting on the shore of a vast ocean, watching the waves come and go, marveling at the shells we find in the sand, and realizing that we are part of something so much larger than ourselves. This sense of belonging is the true fruit of our time together, a quiet knowing that we are never truly alone, and that the light we are seeking is already shining brightly within the very heart that is beating in our chest. This belonging to the light within us often encounters a subtle shadow when we fall into the habit of waiting for a sign, a miracle, or an external confirmation that we are on the right path. We might find ourselves constantly looking for meaningful coincidences, symbols in our dreams, or a specific nod of approval from a teacher to tell us that our inner work is paying on, as if the peace of the heart required a stamped certificate from the world outside. This reliance on external validation is a subtle form of doubt that keeps us from trusting the quiet, steady hum of our own direct experience. When we look outward for the truth, we are like a person who holds a lit lamp in their hand while asking everyone they meet if the sun has risen yet, failing to realize that the warmth they feel is already the very thing they are seeking. There is a story of a young monk who was obsessed with finding the perfect master, one who could perform great feats and provide him with an unmistakable sign of his own future enlightenment. He spent years traveling from village to village, meeting many kind and wise elders, but he always left disappointed because their lives seemed too ordinary, too simple, and too much like his own. One afternoon, while resting by a dusty road, he saw an old woman carefully patching a torn cloak with rhythmic, graceful movements, her face illuminated by a quiet joy that seemed to radiate from her very bones. He asked her who her teacher was, expecting to hear the name of a famous sage in the mountains, but she simply laughed and said that her teachers were the needle, the thread, and the cold wind that reminded her of the value of a warm coat. The monk realized that he had been looking for a grand entrance to the temple while the door had been standing wide open in the simplest moments of life all along. We also often stumble over the mistake of trying to use meditation as a way to predict the future or to gain a sense of control over the uncertainty of our lives. We might sit in silence with the hidden hope that a clear answer to a difficult problem will suddenly pop into our heads, or that we will somehow gain the foresight to avoid the challenges that lie ahead. While a calm mind does indeed see more clearly, using the practice as a tool for cosmic problem-solving turns the sanctuary of the cushion into just another office where we are working on our to-do list. The true power of the path is not in knowing what will happen tomorrow, but in developing the resilience and the spaciousness to meet whatever happens with a heart that is not easily shaken. It is the shift from wanting to control the ocean to learning how to sail with the wind, trusting that the boat of our awareness is strong enough to handle both the calm and the storm. Sometimes, we find ourselves becoming very attached to our own suffering, using our past wounds or our current difficulties as a kind of spiritual identity that makes us feel unique or profound. We might unconsciously hold on to our sadness or our stress during our practice, afraid that if we truly let it go, we will lose a part of ourselves that we have become comfortable with. This is a very delicate trap, for while our pain deserves our full compassion, it does not define the essence of who we are, it is merely a weather pattern passing through the vast sky of our being. If we cling to the cloud because we like the shape of its shadow, we prevent ourselves from experiencing the clarity of the blue that lies behind it. True liberation involves the courage to be happy, the willingness to let the sun shine on our faces even when we have grown used to the damp and the dark. In the days of the ancient scholars, there was a man who carried a heavy stone in his pocket wherever he went, telling everyone that it was a sacred relic of his ancestors' struggles and that it gave his life a deep sense of meaning. He found it difficult to sit in meditation because the stone was so heavy it made his legs go numb, and it pulled his clothes so that he was always slightly off balance. When he finally asked a teacher how to find ease, the teacher did not tell him to study more or to sit longer, but simply asked him why he was still carrying a rock that no longer served a purpose. The man was shocked to realize that he had confused the weight of his burden with the value of his soul, and as he let the stone fall into the grass, he felt a lightness that allowed his spirit to soar higher than it ever had before. We often carry similar stones made of old grudges, past failures, or self-limiting beliefs, forgetting that we have the power to put them down at any moment we choose. We must also be careful of the mistake of making our spiritual life too tidy, too clean, and too removed from the messy, vibrant, and sometimes chaotic reality of our everyday existence. We might try to curate our thoughts and feelings to match a certain aesthetic of holiness, pushing away anything that feels too loud, too raw, or too human, which only leads to a kind of spiritual sterility. A garden that is perfectly weeded and paved over with stone may look neat, but it has no room for the wild flowers to bloom or for the earth to breathe, and it soon becomes a place where nothing new can grow. Our practice should be a place where we can bring our entire selves, including the parts that are confused, angry, or unfinished, trusting that the light of awareness is big enough to hold it all without judgment. Every time we sit, we are invited to enter the laboratory of the heart, where we can observe the chemistry of our own reactions and the biology of our own peace with a sense of curious detachment. We are not there to judge the results of the experiment, but to simply witness the process, noticing how the mind moves from heat to cool, from noise to silence, and from contraction to expansion. This scientific yet loving gaze is what allows us to see through the illusions of the ego and to touch the reality of our interconnectedness with all of life. We begin to see that our individual breath is part of the great atmosphere that feeds the trees, the animals, and every human being on this beautiful, turning earth. This realization of being part of a larger whole helps us to avoid the mistake of thinking that our meditation is a private affair that only benefits ourselves. While we sit alone or in a quiet room, the peace we cultivate ripples outward like a stone thrown into a pond, touching the lives of our families, our co-workers, and even the strangers we pass in the street. A person who is less reactive, more kind, and more present acts as a natural cooling influence in a world that is often overheated with conflict and haste. We do not need to say a single word about our practice to make a difference, for the quality of our presence speaks much louder than any lecture or sermon ever could. As we continue to flow together through these reflections, let us remember that the goal of our journey is not to reach a place where we never make mistakes, but to reach a place where we are no longer afraid of them. Every stumble is a teacher, every distraction is a chance to return, and every moment of confusion is a doorway to a deeper kind of clarity. We are learning to walk with a lighter step, to breathe with a softer heart, and to live with a mind that is as open as the horizon at dawn. There is a great joy in this discovery, a sense of playfulness that comes when we stop trying so hard to be perfect and start allowing ourselves to be truly alive. The playfulness of being truly alive often brings us to a subtle crossroad where we might mistakenly believe that the peace we find in meditation is a form of passivity, a way of retreating from the world because we no longer care about the outcomes of our actions. It is a common misunderstanding to think that being mindful means becoming indifferent, as if having a calm heart required us to lose our passion, our creativity, or our drive to help others. This numbness is a counterfeit of equanimity, for true spiritual depth does not drain the color from our lives, but rather intensifies it, allowing us to engage with the world more fully because we are no longer paralyzed by the fear of failure or the thirst for praise. When we sit, we are not learning to disconnect, we are training ourselves to connect without the heavy chains of attachment that usually make our interactions so exhausting. There is a beautiful old story of a master craftsman who was asked to carve a monumental gate for a temple, and he spent months simply walking through the forest, looking at the trees without touching a single tool. His students grew impatient, wondering if he had lost his spark or if he had become too detached to care about the commission, but the master simply told them he was waiting for the wood to reveal its own intent. When he finally picked up his chisel, he worked with a speed and a joy that seemed almost supernatural, as if the wood and the tool were dancing together. He explained that his meditation had not made him lazy, it had simply removed the clutter of his own ego, allowing the natural energy of the universe to flow through his hands without resistance. When we approach our lives this way, our work, our art, and our relationships become effortless expressions of a deeper truth rather than a tiring struggle against the current. We also frequently fall into the trap of overanalyzing the meaning of our meditation, trying to turn every quiet moment into a profound philosophical insight that we can write down and save for later. We might find ourselves during a session already planning how we will describe this particular feeling of calm to a friend, or how we can turn a brief thought into a social media post about enlightenment. This observer, who is constantly narrating our experience, is just another layer of the thinking mind, a clever trick to keep us from actually being in the experience itself. True presence has no narrator, it is a direct, wordless contact with the texture of the now, like the way a child feels the cool splash of water without needing to define the word refreshment. If we spend all our time labeling the flowers in our inner garden, we never actually stop to smell their fragrance. In a quiet monastery located near a rushing waterfall, there was a young seeker who kept a detailed journal of every sensation, every vision, and every thought that occurred during his hours of sitting, convinced that he was building a map to the heavens. He presented his volumes of notes to the elder, expecting praise for his diligence, but the elder simply took the journals and tossed them into the fire, watching as the pages turned to ash. The young man was horrified, but the elder looked at him with eyes full of compassion and said that by trying to keep the past alive on paper, he was missing the living truth that was breathing right in front of him. The truth cannot be captured in ink or held in memory, it must be lived fresh in every single heartbeat. For the moment we try to freeze it into a concept, it ceases to be the truth and becomes just another dead idea. Another subtle error is the habit of using meditation as a way to enhance the ego, where we subconsciously seek to become more charismatic, more influential, or more special through our spiritual practice. We might notice that we feel a bit more centered, and suddenly we find ourselves walking with a certain air of superiority, or speaking in a voice that we think sounds more enlightened. This is a very dangerous detour, for the path is meant to be a process of thinning the ego, not fattening it up with new, spiritualized labels. If our practice makes us feel like we are somebody who is better than nobody, we have missed the mark entirely, as the goal is to realize that the somebody we have been protecting is just a collection of stories and habits that have no permanent reality. True wisdom is found in the ability to be completely ordinary, to be so comfortable in our own skin that we have no need to stand out or be noticed at all. This leads us to the mistake of confusing the map with the destination, where we become so devoted to a particular technique, a specific lineage, or a set of rules that we forget the purpose of those tools was to help us find our own inner light. We might argue about the correct way to hold the tongue, or the exact number of breaths to count, turning the finger that points to the moon into an object of worship. Every technique is like a raft used to cross a wide and turbulent river, and once we reach the other shore, we do not need to pick up the raft and carry it on our backs for the rest of our journey. We must be willing to let go of the very methods that helped us if they begin to turn into rigid dogmas that limit our growth or cause us to judge others who are using different rafts to cross the same water. Every time we notice our mind clinging to a specific way of doing things, we have an opportunity to practice a radical kind of flexibility, a willingness to be surprised by the present moment. We can ask ourselves if we are following a rule because it brings us closer to love, or if we are following it because it makes us feel safe and in control. The heart of the teachings is always found in the direction of more kindness, more openness, and more freedom, and any practice that leads us toward rigidity or exclusion is a sign that we have wandered off the path. We are learning to trust the silent intelligence of the heart, which knows how to respond to life with a grace that no book or set of instructions can ever fully capture. As we breathe together in this gentle flow, let us remember that the most profound insights are often the ones that leave us with nothing to say, only a deep and quiet sense of yes. We do not need to be scholars or experts to touch the truth, for the truth is not a piece of information, it is a way of being that is accessible to anyone with the courage to be still. There is a great relief in realizing that we don't have to figure everything out, and that we can allow ourselves to be held by the same mysterious force that keeps the stars in the sky and the flowers blooming in the spring. This trust is the ultimate antidote to the anxiety of our modern lives, a steady anchor that keeps us grounded even when the winds of change are blowing at their fiercest. Every morning when we wake up, we are given a fresh canvas, a new chance to practice the art of being human with a little more tenderness and a little less judgment. We can choose to meet the challenges of the day not as obstacles to our peace, but as the very ingredients of our awakening, the heat that tempers the steel of our resolve and the rain that softens the soil of our compassion. There is no such thing as a wasted day or a failed meditation if we can find even a single moment to be fully present, to offer a kind word, or to breathe with a sense of genuine gratitude. We are all works in progress, beautiful and messy and full of potential, and there is a sacred beauty in the way we continue to show up, over and over again, for the quiet work of the soul. As we move forward, let us carry this sense of lightness with us, letting it infuse our steps and our words with a quality of joy that does not depend on the world being perfect. We can be a source of quiet strength for those who are struggling, not because we have all the answers, but because we are no longer afraid of the questions. Our presence becomes a gift, a silent reminder that there is a peace that surpasses all understanding, and that this peace is the birthright of every living being. Let us continue to breathe, to open, and to trust, knowing that every moment is an invitation to come home to the heart and to celebrate the simple, extraordinary miracle of being alive. This quiet celebration of being alive leads us to recognize another subtle mistake that often creeps into our practice, which is the tendency to turn our mindfulness into a defensive wall against the messy, unpredictable nature of human relationships. We sometimes use our newfound calm as a way to avoid the friction of intimacy, thinking that if we remain perfectly centered and detached, we will never have to deal with the pain of being misunderstood or the challenge of a heated disagreement. This is a form of spiritual isolation that can make us feel safe, but it also makes us very lonely, as we are essentially trying to live in a world where no one can touch our hearts. True sitting should not make us more distant, it should make us more available, giving us the inner spaciousness to hear the unspoken needs of others and the courage to be vulnerable in the face of love. There is an old story of a man who lived in a cave for 20 years, believing he had mastered the art of universal compassion because he felt a great sense of warmth whenever he thought about the suffering of all sentient beings. He eventually decided to return to his village to share this vast love, but within an hour of his arrival, he was deeply offended because the local baker did not greet him with the respect he felt he deserved. He realized in that stinging moment that it is very easy to love humanity when you are alone in a cave, but it is much harder to love the actual person standing in front of you with their own flaws and bad moods. His meditation had been a beautiful dream, but he had yet to learn how to wake up to the reality of other people, which is where the true practice of the heart actually begins. Another common shadow on the path is the habit of overcomplicating the simple act of awareness by adding layers of visualization, complex mantras, or esoteric techniques that we think will make us more advanced. While these tools have their place, we often use them as a way to avoid the raw, unvarnished truth of the present moment, much like a person who paints a beautiful landscape on their window instead of looking at the real garden outside. We might spend our entire session trying to imagine a golden light or a specific deity, yet fail to notice the very real sensation of the air moving in our nostrils or the quiet thrum of our own heartbeat. The most profound magic is not found in the exotic or the complex, but in the absolute simplicity of a mind that is no longer trying to be anywhere else but here. In the days when the forest was thick and the roads were narrow, a young student approached a wise grandmother who was known for her deep serenity and asked her what secret visualization she used to stay so calm. The grandmother smiled, showing the many lines of laughter on her face, and said that she simply imagined that every person she met was her own child, and every task she performed was a gift for a dear friend. She did not need complex symbols or ancient languages, for her heart had found a way to translate the deep truths of the spirit into the simple language of kindness and service. When we strip away the decorations of our practice, we find that the core of the path is always about the quality of our connection to the living world around us. We also find ourselves falling into the mistake of treating our meditation as a secret hobby that is separate from our ethical choices and the way we treat the world's resources. We might sit in silence for an hour, feeling very peaceful, and then go about our day making choices that cause harm to others or the environment without a second thought. This disconnect creates a hollow kind of spirituality that only exists on the cushion, failing to transform the way we actually live and move in the world. True awareness is not just about what happens behind closed eyes, it is about the integrity of our lives, the way we speak to those who serve us, the way we handle our anger, and the way we choose to spend our energy. There was once a wealthy merchant who built a magnificent meditation hall on his estate, decorated with the finest silks and the most expensive incense, where he invited the most famous teachers to speak. He considered himself a very devout man, yet he was known throughout the province for being dishonest in his dealings and harsh with his workers. One day, a traveling monk refused to enter the beautiful hall, saying that the air inside was too heavy with the weight of stolen dreams and broken promises to allow for true silence. The merchant realized that his meditation was just a thin layer of gold leaf covering a life that was out of balance, and he began the long, difficult work of making amends, finding that true peace only came when his actions finally matched his aspirations. We must also be careful of the mistake of looking for a permanent finish line in our spiritual journey, a place where we will finally be done and can stop practicing. This idea of a final destination is a trick of the mind that wants to turn growth into a commodity that can be acquired and owned, like a house or a title. In reality, the path is an endless unfolding, a continuous process of waking up and letting go that remains as fresh and demanding on the last day of our lives as it was on the first. There is no point at which we can say we have arrived, for the very moment we think we are enlightened is the moment we have fallen back into the trap of the ego. Every breath we take is a reminder that life is a movement, not a static state, and that our peace must be as fluid and adaptable as the water in a river. If the river stops moving, it becomes stagnant and loses its clarity, and if our practice stops evolving, it becomes a dry routine that no longer nourishes our soul. We learn to embrace the uncertainty of the journey, finding a sense of security not in knowing where we are going, but in the strength of our commitment to stay awake along the way. This willingness to be a perpetual beginner is what keeps our hearts soft and our minds open to the infinite possibilities that each new day brings. As we continue to share this space of reflection, let us let go of the need to be experts or to have all the answers, and instead embrace the humble beauty of not knowing. There is a great freedom in admitting that we are still learning, still stumbling, and still discovering the vastness of our own hearts. We are like travelers on a ship that is sailing across a boundless ocean, marveling at the stars that guide us and the deep blue that carries us, realizing that the journey itself is the home we have been looking for. Every moment of genuine presence is a port of call, a chance to rest and recharge before we set out once again into the great mystery of our existence. The mistakes we make are not obstacles to our enlightenment, but are the very rungs on the ladder that help us climb out of the well of our own confusion. Each time we recognize a false turn or a subtle trap, we gain a bit more wisdom and a lot more compassion for ourselves and for all the other travelers who are making the same journey. We are all in this together, woven into a single tapestry of light and shadow, and our individual awakening is a gift that we offer to the entire universe. Let us continue to breathe with ease, to sit with kindness, and to walk with a heart that is wide enough to hold the whole world. Holding the whole world in our hearts brings us to a final, delicate realization about the nature of the path, where we often mistake the shadow of the ego for the light of the soul by believing that our meditation is something we are doing for our own benefit alone. There is a subtle, lingering danger in thinking of peace as a personal possession, a secret treasure that we store away in a private vault to keep ourselves safe from the storms of life. If we treat our silence as a commodity, we accidentally strengthen the very wall of self that the practice is designed to gently dissolve, creating a new kind of spiritual selfishness that is even harder to see than the worldly kind. True awareness is not a wall that shuts others out, but a window that opens wide, letting the warmth of our presence spill out into the lives of everyone we touch, from the family member who tests our patience to the stranger who needs a simple, genuine smile. There is a story of a great sage who sat for decades in a mountain retreat, reaching states of profound stillness where the very birds would nest in his hair and the deer would sleep at his feet without fear. He felt he had reached the ultimate peak of human potential, yet one night he had a vision of a simple mother in a nearby village who was caring for her sick child, her eyes tired from lack of sleep and her hands rough from constant labor. He saw that her every movement, her every tired breath, and her every whispered word of comfort held more true enlightenment than all his years of solitary silence, because her peace was entirely for the sake of another. He realized that sitting is not about escaping the world to find God, but about finding the divine spark in the middle of the world's suffering and joy, and he returned to the village to serve, finding that his heart was never more still than when his hands were busy helping others. We also tend to struggle with the concept of effortless effort, often falling into the trap of trying to force our way into relaxation, which is like trying to flatten the surface of a lake by hitting the waves with a wooden board. We might spend our time on the cushion, grit our teeth, determined to be peaceful, and then feeling a sense of deep frustration when our mind continues to chatter like a restless forest. This struggle is the last gasp of the ego trying to control the uncontrollable, refusing to trust that the mind will settle on its own if we only stop stirring the water. When we learn to let go of the meditator, who is trying so hard to achieve something, we discover that the stillness we were looking for was already there, waiting in the background like the blue sky that remains constant even when the clouds are thick and dark. In the old scrolls, it is written that a king once asked a forest dweller to show him the greatest miracle of the spiritual life, expecting to see a display of flying through the air or walking on water. The forest dweller simply led the king to a quiet path and asked him to watch a single leaf falling from a tree, pointing out how the leaf did not struggle against the wind, did not fear the ground, and did not try to hold on to the branch a moment longer than necessary. He told the king that the greatest miracle is not changing the laws of nature, but living in perfect harmony with them, accepting the seasons of our lives with a heart that is completely at ease with both the blooming and the falling. When we stop fighting the reality of our own human nature, we find a freedom that no special power could ever provide, a grace that allows us to move through life with a sense of lightness and wonder. Many of us also make the mistake of thinking that we must wait until we are enlightened, before we can be of any use to the world, holding back our kindness and our compassion until we feel we have reached some perfect state of being. This is a subtle form of pride that keeps us focused on our own progress rather than on the needs of those around us, forgetting that a single candle can light 1,000 others without losing any of its own flame. You do not need to be a master to offer a hand to someone who has fallen, nor do you need to be a saint to listen with a heart that is truly present and open. The world does not need more perfect people, it needs more people who are willing to be real, to be kind, and to share the little bit of light they have found with sincerity and humility. Every time we breathe out, we are practicing the ultimate letting go, a small rehearsal for the moment when we will eventually release everything we have ever known and return to the source from which we came. This perspective is not a cause for sadness, but a reason for a profound kind of joy, for it reminds us that every moment is precious, every breath is a gift, and every interaction is a sacred opportunity to practice love. We stop taking our problems so seriously and start taking our capacity for joy more seriously, realizing that the shortest path to heaven is simply to be fully present in the hells and heavens of our daily lives. This is the true meaning of the kind roots we are planting within ourselves, a foundation of strength and compassion that can weather any season and provide shade for anyone who seeks rest. As we move together through the final echoes of this shared reflection, let us remember that there is no such thing as a perfect practice, only a sincere one. The mistakes we have discussed are not failures, they are the very textures of the path, the lessons that teach us how to be more human and more divine at the same time. We are like musicians who are learning to play a beautiful melody, and every missed note is just a chance to tune our hearts once again and begin the song with more depth and more understanding. There is a vast, silent choir of souls all around us, each singing their own unique part of the great song of life, and our only job is to stay in tune with the rhythm of our own breath and the melody of our own kindness. We leave this space not as different people, but as people who have remembered who they always were beneath the noise and the dust of a busy world. We carry with us a quiet confidence that does not need to be proven to anyone, a steady warmth that does not depend on the weather, and a sense of peace that is as natural as the rising of the sun. The journey does not end here, it simply changes shape as we step off the cushion and back into the vibrant, noisy, beautiful dance of our lives, taking our mindfulness with us like a gentle fragrance that lingers in the air long after the flower has passed. We are the masters of our own inner landscape, and we have discovered that the secret to a happy life is not in avoiding the shadows, but in learning how to dance with them until they become part of the light. Every step you take from this moment forward can be a walking meditation, every word you speak can be a mantra of kindness, and every breath you take can be a prayer of gratitude for the sheer mystery of being alive. You are not alone on this road, for the earth beneath your feet supports you, the air you breathe connects you to all living things, and the light in your heart is the same light that shines in the furthest stars. Trust in the goodness that is your true nature, forgive yourself for being human, and never forget that you are exactly where you need to be, doing exactly what you need to do to find your way home. The peace you have been searching for has been your constant companion, hidden in the very heart that is beating with love right now, and as you open your eyes to the world, may you see that beauty reflected in every face and every blade of grass.